Us on Global Player, the LBC app, and the LBC YouTube channel.
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross question. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app. This is LBC.
Well, let's start with a text question from Scott in West Hampstead. Are resident doctors at risk of breaking their Hippocratic oath not to do their patients any harm by threatening to go on strike again? And will Health Secretary Wes Streeting's latest proposals to the BMA be enough to stop doctors from leaving the UK and going to work in other countries? Josh Simons.
Well, I hope so, and I think it should be. It's a good deal. It's important to set the context of this deal. Resident doctors have had a 30% pay increase. That is the biggest in the public sector, full stop. The new deal gives homegrown UK doctors priority when applying for resident doctor positions because they're now competing in an international market. That's an unprecedented thing to do and will make a material difference to the career progression prospects of resident doctors, which the BMA have rightly raised as an issue.
What message does that send to all of the doctors who've come from abroad to work in the NHS and now will feel that they're being discriminated against?
There's absolutely nothing wrong with a UK NHS provider saying that we want British people who've trained in this country, who've worked hard to get that qualification, to have priority to make sure that they have good quality long-term employment in this country. That is a broader agenda of this government, is to train British workers with skills in this country to do.
See, I'm hearing Nigel Farage speaking now.
I think it's a bizarre thing if you think that reform own the agenda for training up British workers.
No, but I think if Nigel Farage had come out with this a couple of years ago, you would have criticised it.
Well, I wasn't an MP a couple of years ago, but the important thing is the Labour Party has a very long history of saying that training British workers to do things that we need to do in this country, such as run our NHS, is something we should be proud of and something we should invest in. And I really, really, really hope that the resident doctors who now get to vote on this BMA deal that's been offered to the BMA, which, by the way, the BMA were not even going to put it to their members, which is an extraordinary thing. They were going to impose a strike over Christmas with thousands and thousands of patients waiting to see if they were going to get their appointments and their patients and their operations. They were going to impose that on this country without even letting resident doctors vote on the proposal. So I'm glad that they've done that, and I would really urge resident doctors to take this deal. It's a good deal,
but the strike
and there is no more pro-NHS health secretary waiting in the wings to give them a better.
I don't know how they ballot their members, but the strike starts on Wednesday, so it's too short a time, isn't it?
Well, they've got to do it. We actually offered something that we've almost never done before, which is that we said to the BMA, we will extend their strike mandate to allow them time to consult so that it wasn't hanging over the NHS over Christmas. And they said no to that. You know, that's a baffling thing to do to me. I think it's reprehensible. And I think resident doctors themselves are getting tired of this situation. I think they will look at this deal. They will think it's a good deal. They will recognise that no better deal is coming down the track, and they will vote to back it.
OK, John Redwood.
Well, when this government came to office, one of the promises was that they would get on so much better with the doctors and strikes would be a thing of the past. It's tragic to see them offering a lot of money and still the problems persist. And so, of course, I want to see the government get on better with the doctors because they are important professionals. I have no problem with better career opportunities for them. I think it's a very good idea. And you obviously want them to be promoted up the pay scale as quickly as possible as they get those better jobs. So I wish both sides every success at getting together, but it is a tragedy for all those people wanting treatment that there they are before Christmas, worried sick about whether the doctors are going to turn up and whether the treatment is going to be available. That isn't what we were offered in the election.
Benedict?
I mean, it's a curious thing, as you said, to hear the rhetoric now coming out of the Labour Party, which, you know, might sound a little bit reformy, but of course that's what many people would say. It's because reform has increasingly started to co-opt the space which was once upon a time occupied traditionally by the Labour Party, and the sort of the idea of the working man looking out for the people who are already here, rather than looking at the UK as part of a global market to whom we owe opportunities to absolutely everybody. It's a curious thing. Because on the one hand, you can say, we're offering an unprecedented deal to doctors in this country, people who have been trained in this country. But of course, it is the sort of the carrot and stick approach. If you don't want to take this, well, we are still, or have been for a very long time, part of a global, a market economy where we can import people from overseas. So if you don't want to do this, that's fine. We can import people from overseas. We've done it before. In fact, there are many people, as you've pointed out, who are already working in the NHS. But then there is, I suppose, the moral issue, which is it in fact morally upstanding to say that we're prepared to take people from abroad because they are cheaper than people in this country and say to those people, well, you go off and you make your own way? Is it also morally acceptable for a first world country to do what this country has been doing for a very long time, which is effectively to strip mine the second and third world for their doctors and nurses, which they kind of need as well? And, we've not been paying for their training. Simply because we say, well, this is expedient for us. On the subject of the actual question itself, though, whether or not they risk sort of violating their Hippocratic Oath, you can't, I think, say to doctors who are able to see, amidst the globalizing of the medical profession, who are able to see what is on offer to people in other countries. And it's not just in terms of wages and lifestyle, it's also the efficiency of the services that they can move to. You can't just sort of sit there indefinitely and say, well, nothing will change. It's going to be that you have to just slum it, even though you have all the qualifications to go to Australia or wherever it is. This is just going to be your lot in life. But there has to be some give and some take. Is this just about pay? Is this about NHS reform? Because ultimately we have to recognise part of the reason why other healthcare services are performing better than the NHS, and most of them are, is because they don't run like the NHS. And if you continue to simply run it on this line, all the extra pay in the world isn't going to improve patient outcomes. And ultimately, that is what the healthcare system has to be judged on, not how happy doctors feel about their remuneration, but about whether or not we can make people more healthy, whether or not we can keep them alive. And I don't think that any amount of pay deals is necessarily going to improve that.
Okay, Judith McMinn.
I think one of the things that's got very lost in this is the public's understanding of what the problem really is with the junior doctors. I don't think people know the
Resident, they get very annoyed.
resident. Sorry, yeah. I don't think the public understand what the nuance is of them wanting to strike, and I think that's not been very well played by both sides in terms of informing the public and educating the public about what this is all about. So I too hope, like I think millions of people in this country, that this does get resolved, because at the end of the day, people want to be able to turn up to an A&E department, to be seen, to get their appointment, see a consultant, have whatever services they have on the NHS. And I think that's the really important part in this. But I think the lesson learned from this for both sides is that, there's been a long-running dispute, a long-running argument, and actually it's become a very narrow argument between the two parties, and the wider public less informed.
How much of a role do you think the flu epidemic, in inverted commas, because I don't think it's been actually classed that yet, but it's the highest number of flu patients in hospitals ever at this time of year so far. How should that weigh on the consciences of resident doctors when they vote in this ballot?
Well, the flu is a hype. It's making people concerned that this is very serious, and it should be on the mind of the doctors about the services that they can provide, and actually what disruption would mean for people in need at a time when there's an increased risk. So the flu, whether it's being used by both parties to escalate or de-escalate, it's absolutely front of mind.
Let's have a follow-up caller. It's Ben in Clacton. Ben, good evening. What would you like to say?
Good evening, Ian, and good evening, panel. Well, my question is, why haven't the authorities introduced compulsory mask wearing, because of the flu epidemic?
John?
Well, I guess the authorities have very mixed feelings about whether mask wearing works or not. We had this argument during COVID, and some thought it was a good idea, and others said it had very little impact because the infection could still get out into the airstream around you. So I think we would be guided by doctors on that. If they felt it was going to make a very big contribution to reducing the likelihood of getting flu, then presumably they will tell us. But I don't think it's for a non-doctor to give advice to people on whether it would work or not. Well,
I was reading an article this morning that said that the holes in standard masks are 100 times bigger than the particles that would go through them. So I'm not sure it would... Well, that's one of the dangers, but it would obviously get rid of some of the excess liquid carrying them or whatever, so it may reduce it a bit, I guess. So that's why it's a disagreement.
I think an awful lot of people simply wouldn't comply, in the same way that during COVID many people were prepared to comply because it was an extraordinary set of circumstances. But a lot of people were warning at the time, if you give in to this, then they'll start introducing all sorts of things for all manner of things that are quite minor. Well, there's no more surefire way to sort of confirm the worst suspicions of every conspiracy theorist if every time we have flu, which is every year, you're told by the authorities, you've got to mask up. I suspect, I wouldn't say necessarily that the majority wouldn't, but a large enough minority of people would actually go, no, I'm not going to do this. And I don't know how you'd be able to enforce it with, when you're talking about those sort of sheer numbers of people. Is it really in the best interest of the police to be going around doing the whole mask mandate again thing? It was fine when people were locked down and contact was restricted. It was more manageable then. But actually, if you're just saying, go about your daily lives completely normally, but wear this, I don't think...
I wouldn't make it statutory. I was talking about the advice that might be given because some people would be persuaded.
Judith?
Well, there'll be some people who are higher risk who will determine the risk themselves, and they will wear a mask for the reason that they think they're at higher risk. That's their choice. They should be allowed to do that. I mean, we've become very accustomed to seeing people wear face masks over the last 5 years. So that's their choice if they feel that's a risk. Now, the science of whether it works or it doesn't work, again, that will be their choice.
Josh?
Well, I would respect the public health practitioner's advice on it. I mean, wearing masks, I often thought this, I've got 2 young kids, and when you're out and about in a public place and the adults are wearing masks, it's not costless. The kids don't see the faces of the adults. They can't interact with them in the same way, and I think it changes the relationships between people. So I don't think we should think that masks are just a get-out-of-jail-free card for every flu pandemic. It's a more serious thing to do for a society than that, and I'd be very nervous about mandating anything like that. But of course, where there's public health advice on how best to protect yourself and those around you, you should be able to read that advice and choose how to act on it.
I'm just imagining the phone call from number 10 to you, Josh, when they say, now, we are going to have a mass rollout of masks and we want you to handle it.
They'll send me back to articulate exactly why that's the right thing to do, and I'd be delighted to do so.
Right, we will take more of your calls in just a few moments' time. It's 8:15 on LBC.
LBC.
If I need...
Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
16 minutes past 8, we have Cabinet Office Minister Josh Simons with us. How are you finding being a minister? Is it what you expected or what's been a surprise?
How unglamorous being an MP truly is. I've got 2 young kids and I travel up and down to Wigan with them every Thursday and Sunday. And I spend a lot of time, hunting out mouldy bananas that have been dropped on the bottom of my car, or running down to get them from the end of the platform, and juggling, doing lots of different things. It's there's a lot of graft that you have to do to be a good constituency MP and to think seriously about the things that you as a government are doing. And it's a privilege to be able to do that, but it also requires a lot of absurd situations that you find yourself in all the time.
We have Judith McMinn, founder and chief executive of the sports tech company Rezon. What is a sports tech company? What do you do?
We've developed a protective headband to reduce brain injury in sport.
Oh, really?
So to reduce the risk of concussion, but more importantly, to reduce the accumulated damage of smaller force impacts called subconcussions. which it leads to CTE and early onset dementia, which has been much in the news over the last 5 years. In fact, it's 5 years since the legal action started, the class action started. So our product is worn in 19 sports. We've sold to 32 countries. We're a British-made product. We manufacture in Sheffield. And we're educating people on the benefit of protecting your brain in sport as much as people protect their shins and teeth.
Fantastic. John Redwood, Sir John Redwood, about to be Lord Redwood, is former Conservative Cabinet Minister, and Benedict Spence is a writer and political and social commentator. Let's go to another question. It's from Andrew. Today in Parliament, Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch called Keir Starmer a caretaker Prime Minister, based on the fact that certain Labour MPs appear to be describing him as that. Does the panel agree with this? And if so, what can the PM do to ensure his political survival prior to May's local elections? Benedict Spence.
I mean, I don't think he's long for this role, but it's, questionable how long that could be, because I think actually what Labour is facing, as well as obviously is the Labour Party making it harder to simply get rid of leaders than the Conservatives do, because they've sort of watched on from afar and thought that doesn't look like a very stable way of doing things. It wouldn't be in our best interest to do so. There is the question of who would actually be best placed to replace Keir Starmer, and I think that is something that is probably playing on the minds of lots of Labour MPs. I don't think that there are too many very obvious candidates. There are one or two people who are quite high profile, but the question would have to be, what would that individual bring that would be radically different to what the Prime Minister is offering? It's all very well saying that Wes Streeting is very personable and he's charismatic and he's ambitious. What does he actually bring that makes you think, this would be completely different to the direction that we're currently going in? And I don't see that. In terms of what it is that Keir Starmer could do to change things up, look, it wouldn't be very popular for people like me, especially. But if you really wanted to, I think, change the direction that we're heading in, it would probably be to talk about the culture war issues that have actually been able to rally a lot of people in this country one way or another. What is the key thing about reform right now, apart from migration? What is the genesis of reform? It's the old Brexit party. So what does that stand for? That's Brexit. What isn't there then? There's not really a major party that's advocating what you'd say Remain or something that is much more aligned to the European Union other than the Labour Party. And they are starting to do this. We see them starting to talk about closer alignment with Europe. We've seen actually lots of people be able to make real hay politically out of making this their position. Without meaning to sound too rude, Alistair Campbell has been completely rehabilitated in this country because he is on the right side of Brexit for a lot of people. I think it would be a very, not radicalising, but energising force if this was going to be what Keir Starmer decided his path forward was going to be. It's something that can be quite abstract. It's something that doesn't need to be done in the short term. And also, a lot of people who are pro-Remain genuinely seem to believe that simply rejoining or closer alignment would solve all of our economic problems overnight. It's a wonderful thing that you could sell to people. I think a lot of the backbenchers would get behind it, and it does create a real wedge issue between themselves and reform that Farage can't touch.
John Redwood, you have some experience of this, 1995, when you tried to depose John Major. What would your advice be to Keir Starmer, and what would your advice be to those who maybe want to depose him?
Well, that was very different because that was the Prime Minister wanting a contest. It wasn't me challenging the Prime Minister. He said that he was fed up with us disagreeing around the cabinet table. I had some very genuine disagreements. I wanted to save the pound and change the economic strategy. And so I responded to his open challenge. It's very different if you're trying to pull somebody down. Well, no, it wasn't very generous of me at all. But if somebody says to me, put up or shut up, I'm afraid I put up. I don't think it's a very sensible challenge to do. And I wouldn't have advised John Major to do that. I would have stayed loyal with Inside and argued Inside if that had been his choice. But that was a long time ago and it doesn't really matter anymore. But what does matter here, as Kemi Badenoch has lasered in on, is that there is huge dissatisfaction with Labour backbenchers not properly consulted and having to defend the indefensible, with endless U-turns and really bad policies. I mean, being unkind to the disabled in a way that the Conservatives thoroughly disagreed with was one of his low points. And I think the idea that he can, by stealth, get us back into all sorts of expensive and unhelpful liaisons with Europe is a particularly bad idea. So we would be very strongly against him going on that route, because why join the slow growth club when your problem is that you're falling further and further behind the United States of America? Just read the Draghi report on the European Union, a man who is passionate about the success of the whole noble federal endeavour on the continent. And he has written this report saying they're miles behind America. They can't generate any large companies at all. They can't generate even medium-sized companies on the scale needed. That there's a whole missing generation of digital technology that Europe doesn't touch other than buying it in from America. There's too much regulation, that taxation is rather high. Very good critique.
So that's something
and this Labour government, if it goes that way, it will just confine itself to history with a disastrous
But what should
period
he do
office.
to consolidate his position?
Well, he's got to have some successes. I mean, some of the promises in the manifesto were things that Conservatives as well as Labour voters quite liked. I mean, smash the gangs. When are you going to smash the gangs? The number of gangs have gone up and the number of illegals coming in has gone up. Control inflation and have a stable economy. That'd be really good. But we instead have got inflation almost doubled in the first year and a bit of the Labour administration. Unemployment went from around 4% to around 5%. So after years of progress in getting unemployment down and generating many more jobs, and you've got public expenditure completely out of control, the budget deficit worrying, and the interest rates that the government has to pay to borrow longer, all this year have been higher than the worst day under Liz Truss, which they condemned.
And you want to come back quickly?
I don't want us to rejoin the European Union. I was an ardent Brexiter, still am. I just think ultimately that even with all that you said, which I agree with, a critical mass of people in this country still seem to believe that rejoining would be a good thing. We're not talking about what would be in the best interest.
And if you put it to them,
we're not talking about what's in the best interest of the country. The question was, how can he survive?
Yes, but it won't work, because if you then put to them that there would be real terms and we'd have to pay even more to be in the thing, and we would have to put a whole load of tariffs on, because that's what a customs union is. So we make things dearer that we import. And if you tell them they've got higher unemployment than we've got, why would they want to join that?
How would he be able to last the end of this parliament? That's what we're not talking about. How is it, he's going to be able to last 5,
You can't live a lie. It won't work.
Welcome to British politics. You can absolutely live a lie. I think you've been living in a different world.
Josh Simons, I suspect you might disagree with John here.
Well, Keir Starmer is not going anywhere as Prime Minister. The public in this country are really fed up with the psychodrama of Westminster politics and politicians briefing against each other and changes in Prime Ministers every 2 weeks. And I think, however challenging moments in the past year have been, and for sure they have been, the idea that what the public want is more churn and change at the pace that it happened under the last administration, I just don't believe that. I think that desire to see some stability runs very, very deep. And I think that Labour MPs, my colleagues, know that. And so I think...
Why are they giving quotes to people saying he's a caretaker Prime Minister there? I mean, it's not. This is not isolated incident. It's not journalists making it up.
Who said that, not a Labour MP.
Pardon?
I thought it was a caller who said that, not a Labour MP, wasn't it?
No. Well, no, the caller was quoting Kenny Badenoch in PMQs. But
He's a Conservative, not a Labour MP.
No. But that was somebody being quoted in the Financial Times. You know as well as I do that many of your backbench colleagues are very unhappy and are talking openly about a change of leadership. They've actually done it on radio programmes. Barry Gardner has. Is it Joe White?
Clive Lewis.
I mean, some
type.
of them are the usual suspects, but some are not. And that's when a Prime Minister is in trouble, when it's not the usual suspects. And you must know, I mean, you can't sit there and tell me that nobody's actually had a conversation with you about this over the past few weeks. Can you?
Of course, I'm not pretending that everything's rosy. That would be absurd. And, every single one of us who's Labour MPs, I've been a minister for 2 months now. I was elected for the first time last June. There have been moments of immense frustration. What I have discovered about the state of our country, of our state of our economy, is frustrating, and you have to wade through treacle to get things done, and things need ripping up. And there are lots of examples of where we've come in with a plan and actually we've looked at what needs to be done, and it isn't radical enough. We're not going far enough. We're not going bold enough.
Give me an example.
Well, you yourself gave an example earlier of, John gave an example of smashing the gangs. So that was the core of the plan that we fought the last election on. And the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, when she announced the biggest reforms to asylum in, about half a century, was very, very clear that policy was important, and we will continue with it, and we will keep going with the anti-terrorism style disruption. But it wasn't enough. And so what she announced was wholesale reform to the asylum system, that she judges to be vital to dealing with the underlying issue. And that's a very clear example of where we came in with a plan, we looked at what needed to be done after it wasn't working, and now we've gone quite significantly further with a more fundamental, principle-driven reform. And I think that is what we need to do across, lots of areas of what we're doing, and it's what we are starting.
But 18 months in, the problem is worse, and the things she's announced are not going to change that. You're still going to have this very large number of people coming over every time the weather is any good. And you still don't know what to do with them. And you've ripped out the one place you could send them to if they were illegal. And if you just speed up making decisions, you're either going to grant them all asylum because it's the easiest thing to do, or if you find that a lot of them shouldn't get asylum, you've got nowhere to send them, and you've still got a huge housing problem. What are you going to do about it?
The asylum policy statement changes what it means to be an asylum seeker in this country. That is, it's got nothing to do with, sending them back to a different country. It's got nothing to do with some of the.
Yeah, but they're here already. What are you going to do with them?
Well, your argument, John, just 15 seconds ago was that it won't make a difference to the number of people crossing in boats. That was your assertion, not what are you going to do with them.
Yeah.
You have no evidence for that proposition, and I'm making the argument to you.
No, it's a forecast, but I think it'd be better than yours saying it's all going to come gloriously right.
Time. And gloriously right is not. Let's not pretend here. Of course, it's not going to come gloriously right. This is a difficult problem to do with the security of our borders. And what we have done as a government is recognise that the thing that we were doing wasn't working fast enough, and so we have developed a radical series of proposals that change the meaning of what it means to be an asylum seeker in this country. And the proposition that underpins those proposals is that will significantly change the incentives.
The biggest change you're going to make is more safe routes. So how many more people are you simply going to invite in? Because that isn't what people have got in mind for reform.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yes.
Because you keep shifting your argument, John. First, you're saying that the asylum policy changes will not reduce the number of boat crossings. Then you're saying, no, the reason why I have a problem with it is because we will open up safe and legal routes, and that's bad because we shouldn't let people.
Well, they can both be true.
Which is a completely different argument. The reason why you open up safe and legal routes is to dissuade people and the economy that underlies it from coming over on small boat crossings. So those things are connected. Now, you don't believe they will make a difference to the small boat crossing. The Home Secretary does. I do. And we will see what happens over time.
Okay.
The question we started with was, what are examples of things where we haven't gone far enough? We've gone back to first principles, reformed the underlying system. That, to me, is a very clear example.
I'm going to come to Judith in just a second, but one question. You used the phrase a moment ago called it's like wading through treacle, which I have a lot of sympathy for, and I'm sure John does, having been in government as well. Have you found that it's really difficult to persuade the oil tanker that is a civil service that something needs to be done and it needs to be done now rather than in 6 months' time?
Yes. And the reason for that is not actually that there are thousands of civil servants working from home with their feet up, drinking cups of tea and eating mince pies. It's not so much that no individual doesn't want to do it. It's that the way that the system has grown up and developed and frankly been wholly misgoverned over a long period of time, and I really mean that, it is shocking how bad the state of our state has become under the last government. And in order to change that, it's not just a process of tweaking and fiddling and so on. We have to sort of fundamentally change how talent is promoted, how people are hired and fired, what sort of expertise people have when they come together. My background's in technology and data, and you bring together small multidisciplinary teams focused on a particular problem and you solve them fast. That's how good organisations work. And that is how we are going to have to make the British state work.
And John, you'll probably say it was exactly like that when you were a minister as well.
Well, there were always difficulties, shall we say, but I think we handled them rather better in my day.
Well, you would say that. Judith, sorry.
I think just going back to the question, I think a lot of the public think that Keir Starmer's time is up. They've been unimpressed. They haven't seen change. They were promised huge change. And I think they're frustrated. And that, that's reflected in the opinion polls that come around. So yes, he's on borrowed time. And I think the second part of the question you asked was, what can he do? Well, get a grip would be a start. There's a very, very short window to show progress, to demonstrate that something has changed. And the most obvious place to start is the economy. I'm speaking as, an entrepreneur trying to get investment into a business. No one's interested in investing. They've sat in their hands for 6 months. They've waited on the budget. They were unimpressed from what the budget gave them. If he wants to make real impact very quickly, it has to be in the economy first. That gives people the confidence. Then they can see the next problem to resolve. And Yeah, Keir Starmer has just lost credibility and competence. He's seen as managerial, academic, and spends far too much time abroad. Why does he spend a sixth of his time abroad? Why is he not?
Is this part of his job?
Yes, but not probably for as much as he needs to be done at home. And I think a lot of people would probably feel if he spent a little bit more time at home, focused on resolving issues here, he probably then would be more accountable and probably could talk a little bit more up some of the successes.
So you shouldn't go to the G20, you shouldn't go to see Donald Trump. I mean, that is part of what a Prime Minister does.
It's not about not going, it's about going in proportion, it's about going and promoting British interests, it's about bringing back a narrative about what does that mean for our country, how's that bettering day in, day out people's lives.
Josh, do you want to respond?
Well, I think workers in Jaguar Land Rover who have jobs still because of the US trade deal and all of the trips he made to the United States over the past year would not agree with that proposition. Every time we get a trade deal with a foreign power, India, the United States and so on, the workers in this country who benefit from those trade deals are grateful for the diplomatic work that went into producing them. And they are complicated things that take time and trust. And the starting point, let's just bear in mind the starting point. Our country's international standing and relationships when we took power were at an all-time low. And it has taken graft and relationship building and proper diplomatic work to rebuild those relationships in order to get things like the trade deal from which British workers benefit.
Well, then, if that is a success, why is that not being told by Keir Starmer to the people on the street because it's being lost? That's the point about getting a grip. If this was a business, if he was just a CEO of a business and he wasn't communicating with his shareholders and he wasn't telling about the successes, he would be out. A caretaker CEO.
Well, that's why I'm here to make the case.
All right, we will take some more questions in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. You can call us or WhatsApp us on that number. It's 8:33 News Headlines with Daryl Jackson.
Resident doctors in England are considering whether to call off planned strikes next week after a new government offer. Ministers say it includes measures to tackle a jobs crisis, but no new pay rise. It's reported that Ukraine has sent a revised peace plan to Washington this evening. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, joined the French and German leaders in talks with Donald Trump about ending the war there earlier. And the best-selling British author Sophie Kinsella has died at the age of 55. She revealed last year that she had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of brain cancer. LBC weather, a dry and clear night for much of the south, rain for much of northern Scotland, but this will clear later, a low of 4 degrees.
LBC.
Hey, Harry.
Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:36 on LBC. We have Josh Simons, Labour's Cabinet Office Minister and MP for Makerfield, which is Wigan, basically, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Towns in the south of Wigan, former pit villages.
That's Sir John Redwood, is former Conservative Cabinet Minister, former MP for Wokingham. Judith McMinn is founder and chief executive of the sports tech company Rezon. It's spelled Rezon.
Yes.
Is there any reason for that? Get it?
Get it? Because REASON, the designer thought wasn't very street cred, so he changed
And
it.
the domain name had gone.
Yes, and so we did that instead. But there's a reason to protect the brain, so that's how
Right.
Reason, the name was crafted.
And Benedict Spence is here, writer, political and social commentator. Right, Paul is in Twickenham. Paul, what would you like to ask?
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, panel. Is it right to change human rights law to suit changing circumstances and or political convenience?
Now, European nations, including the UK, have agreed to negotiate a new approach to how the European Convention on Human Rights is interpreted in order to stop asylum seekers using it to avoid being deported. John Redwood.
Well, of course it's right and very necessary. I don't think it's good enough to delay this until May and then only make it a declaration. What these countries are hoping, because they now see that voters are going to parties that want to control migration much better, they're hoping that if they make a general statement saying you shouldn't be so extreme in your interpretation of the existing treaty, oh judges, they will all fall into line. Well, I think it's very unlikely they will. And they seem to be mainly concentrating on Article 8, which is the right to a family life, which has been greatly extended and been very generous to people who aren't really proper asylum seekers. But there's also Article 3 as well, about prohibition of torture, which has got very extended. These were good articles if properly defined, because nobody wants to see people being tortured, and they have every right to try and find asylum somewhere else, and we should be generous about genuine cases. But we see these are being used in a whole series of cases to block the removal of people, including some criminals from our country who shouldn't be here, and where the interpretation is remarkably generous.
Do you think that, as your party leader says, that Britain should actually withdraw from the ECHR?
Well, of course, because I believe in our national sovereignty, and I think our British Parliament is a good moral interpreter of the public will, and the public will is not where the European Court of Human Rights is at the moment. And so we should have confidence in our own institutions and should have a proper law legislated in Britain. Now, Labour is going to amend the law to guide British judges, but it's no point in just doing that if you don't also amend or remove the law in Europe, which otherwise trumps them.
But I'm sure a lot of these other countries are quite proud of their legal traditions, yet they're not threatening to withdraw completely from the ECHR.
Well, that's up to them, but we want effective control over our borders, and we're not getting it at the moment. And the last government, who did have somewhere to send people who were illegally claiming asylum and were rejected, this government's cut that out. But you need that, but you also need to be free of a challenge in a court on the continent saying your court's got it wrong, and on very tenuous grounds this person should be at your expense from here on.
But there were only 13 cases of people who have been prevented from being deported by the use of Article 8 on family life. I mean, only 13.
Yes, but it affected everything. It affected the way British judges decided the cases because they didn't want to be trumped, or they felt they had to follow the European Convention. And it certainly affected the way all the officials looked at the cases when they were judging them. There was perfectly good jurisprudence in Europe saying you really have to let practically everybody in. If they don't like the food somewhere, then they should stay, or whatever it was. You know, there were some absurd cases, and that's why you have to strip that out and say we have confidence in our own moral ability to legislate a fair answer.
Josh, you've been shaking your head.
Yeah, I think this argument is so profoundly wrong, and it's exactly the kind of thinking that has led this country up a garden path. So let me just say, I'm Jewish. I believe in the origin of this piece of law and its history, and I believe in what it was trying to do. I also think it has to change. The world has changed. The system of migration has changed around the world. And so we do have to adapt the principles that were in it to the times that we live in. The question is how. So one way of doing that is to do what the Prime Minister has done today, which is actually pretty extraordinary, and Conservatives confidently and lazily asserted for years that it was not possible to start to get 27 European countries to agree on changing the treaty, and that is exactly what they have started to say that they're going to do.
But they're not changing the treaty, they're offering guidance.
Well, let's see. That's the first step in a diplomatic process, as you know well. But the second point is the more fundamental one. And this is where I think Conservative politicians and Reform politicians have so vastly underestimated our own domestic institutions. Parliament in the United Kingdom can do and say what it wants to do. It is the sovereign body. That means that when we sign an international treaty, if Parliament chooses to interpret that treaty in whatever way it so pleases, it can do that. If its politicians choose to pass the buck to Europe, to some other capital around the world that it's made a treaty with, and say, I blame you for my own failings, then that is the fault of parliamentary politicians choosing not to pass a law. And it was not a Conservative government that used to rail against the ECHR that ever bothered to bring a bill in the UK Parliament to use that institution to change how it's applied. It is a Labour government. And the important point is that we, respecting our Parliament, means using our Parliament to say, we, as the legislature of the United Kingdom, have the right to interpret foreign treaties that we sign.
So you're going to introduce a bill to do this?
In this context. The Home Secretary and the Prime Minister have both made very clear that they are going to reform Article 8 of the ECHR. There is a question about Article 3 and the right mechanism to reform that. Is it via international treaty or is it via domestic law? But absolutely, we are committed to reforming the ECHR. And the reason is because we believe in Parliament.
What about John's point about the UK sovereignty? We have a respected legal system throughout the world. Why can't our courts be trusted to do what we want them to do? Why does there have to be a European level in this?
Because it's Parliament's job to instruct our court. That's how our constitution works. And it is a wonderful thing that the people in this country can elect a government who has a majority, and that government will not be constrained by courts in passing the laws that it chooses to pass. Now, what that means is, if a government for 14 years chooses to rail against European institutions and doesn't bother to use its own parliament to pass laws about them, it cannot blame foreign courts, it should blame itself. So what we have said is we will use our parliament to instruct our courts in how they should interpret that law, and they will do so.
I think there's a real risk here of debating reform and delivering reform. And I think what the government needs to be very careful about is that there's a strong will for change. But actually, do they have enough time to actually be able to deliver that reform? And I think that's what the public will be asking for. I think the debate is quite a long-standing debate. I think most people would agree that it needs to be changed, it needs to be reformed, but being able to actually deliver on that reform will be the real test of the government. And that will be back to the earlier question, what can Keir Starmer do? Well, there's another opportunity for him to be able to mark his card for success if he can show progress in that in the next 6 to 9 months.
I mean, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because it seems in some ways as though the election was only yesterday, but it was 17 months ago. If you don't introduce this kind of reform, say, within 2 years, the electorate hasn't really got much of a chance to make up its mind before the next election, has it? Because you have to have a bit of time to enable that to happen, Josh.
Well, there's a couple of things to say about that. I mean, of course, it's important to get done what you need to get done before the election to show that you can deliver change. So I absolutely take the point. The first thing to say is that unilaterally leaving the ECHR, one of the many reasons why it's such a whopping red herring, is that you're not then done. You then have to renegotiate the Good Friday Agreement. You then have to renegotiate every single trade deal from which Jaguar Land Rover workers, for example, benefit, because the Good Friday Agreement and the ECHR is written into those trade deals. That takes a hell of a lot of time. But the more important point is
you're the Minister for State Reform. You're the man to do it.
I will try my best.
But you wouldn't be changing that bit of it. I mean, I don't buy that argument at all.
I think that there's a lot to be said about this. I think that, I think it doesn't matter what I think, it's true. Parliament is sovereign. Parliament can supersede all of these things if it so wishes. And it's good to hear a government minister saying so, because now we have it from the horse's mouth. They will live and they will die by whether or not they actually do enact the changes that the public clearly wants. Fundamentally, you do not live in a democracy if you cannot change unpopular laws or treaties.
Yep.
And ultimately, this, I think, has been sort of held up. And this was one of the major issues around membership of the European Union and also the ECHR, this idea that there is some greater body to which you cannot, in fact, have any kind of change, any kind of recourse, because there are simply too many layers towards this. Well, if we're going down that process, having left the European Union, and now we're talking about this, if Parliament truly is sovereign, well, then it almost doesn't matter if we're members or not. Although I do think that the point about the Northern Ireland agreement is rather important and isn't something that should just be taken by the wayside. But ultimately, if what we are accepting now, which is important because it's not been done for a very long time, which is that governments are the ones that decide and that they are not going to be passive and say, oh, well, that's nothing to do with us. This treaty says that we can't do X, Y, Z. This body says that we can't do anything about it. If they are going to do that, and if nothing actually changes, and I think this goes back to an earlier question, if things don't happen fast enough, then people will justifiably sit there and go, well, what was the point of all of that? And actually what I do is go back to what you were saying earlier, Josh, about immigration, illegal immigration, changing the definition around what is and what isn't an asylum seeker. If you don't make these changes fast enough, the Overton window has shifted so far that it's over there. On the subject of small boat crossings, I don't think we're at the point anymore where people care about whether or not they're coming on a boat or not. It's that they're here full stop. I think you have completely missed that opportunity. So to sit there and say, well, we're going to change the definition of what is or isn't an asylum seeker, I think far too many voters now sit there and go, I don't care. They're here, whatever you call them, and I would like that to be reversed. If you decide to go at a certain pace, fine, you'll make some progress, but is it fast enough when you have an insurgent party on the right that is also very much part of the working class, which is supposed to be the Labour Party's grassroots, snapping at your heels, taking up all of that support, and promising the earth? It doesn't matter that the earth might not be, attainable. That's what they're promising, and it's what you're not delivering.
OK, let's take a short break and take some more questions. It's 8:47.
This is LBC. Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:49, Josh Simons, Sir John Redwood, Judith McMinn and Benedict Spence are with us taking your questions. Here's one from Kai. With 25 more peerages awarded by the Prime Minister today and the persistence of the Lords blocking manifesto commitments on workers' rights, is it time for an elected second chamber to replace the Lords now? Now, peerages have been put forward for 31 people to join the House of Lords, 25 from Labour, 3 from the Lib Dems, plus 2 Liberal Democrat hereditary peers who are set to be abolished soon, 3 from the Conservatives, including John Redwood here, plus 1 independent peer who's also currently a hereditary peer. Or is it an hereditary peer? Judith, let's start with you on this.
So I think the House of Lords does need reform. It needs to reflect a diversity of insights, skills that reflect this country. And, more has to be done to that. And I think some of the political parties have tried to do that. But when you look at the list today, and no offence to John, it does reflect people that are very close to the parties, beneficiaries, people who've been working with those parties for a long time. So I'm not sure the message is quite getting across about bringing the types of people into the House of Lords that we need to problem solve. And I think the second thing about bringing people into the House of Lords is their commitment to it. We need people that are there, that are dedicated to it, that are focused on resolving, clarifying, improving, enhancing what's coming through the House. So, the House of Lords does need reform. It needs more people to reflect the skills, the insights of our society, and it needs people who are very dedicated to that cause.
Benedict?
I actually think there's a lot to be said about that. I think actually there's no point in having a second chamber, a higher chamber, that just mirrors the lower one as well. I think that then you'll just sort of get a carbon copy of the first, and it'll become just as sort of, it'll be afflicted by the same problems, basically, as the House of Commons, if you do that, in which case, why bother having a second chamber at all? I think that the strength of having it is based on experience and expertise and potentially coming from above and outside of the political fray. And I don't think it's beyond, actually, our imagination to come up with a system whereby we are able to have an upper chamber that is reflective of the population. And I don't just mean in terms of its, its gender makeup or ethnic makeup. I do think the point about people who have worked in different sectors is actually very important, because I think having that kind of level of expertise across the board is something that very often, again, you don't get in the House of Commons, because it's much more about who is friends with who in this party, who has worked very hard in this party, in this constituency office, and so forth. As I say, it wouldn't be... probably take quite a bit of imagination to think up a system by which we could create this body. But I don't think it's beyond our capabilities ultimately to do so, whether it could be by people recommending individuals, or whether there's some sort of independent body that goes around actually inviting people, saying, would you be interested in sitting for a term of, say, 5 years? I don't think that's beyond our ability to do. I think that's an opportunity to create a body that scrutinises and does so based on expertise rather than friendships or alliances or anything like that.
We do that with boards on, executive boards. So why can we not take the lessons learned and the governance that's in place in that to bring in insight? So, I just think that really needs looked at.
John Redwood.
Well, I'm a great believer in the primacy of the House of Commons, having spent many years as a member of Parliament, and I think there's only a role for one elected chamber. If you elect a second chamber at the same time as the first chamber, you don't add anything, you'll get the same answer. If you elect them mid-term, you'll hardly be able to govern, because one chamber will have a very different composition normally to the other, and it would just be a logjam. So I like the idea that the House of Commons forms the main principal people in the government and is answerable directly to the electorate with the single-member constituencies. I think that works very well. I think there is a role for a revising chamber, and that chamber has to understand its role, and it does need to assemble people of repute and expertise. And I think it does help if we've done things other than just be politicians. So I've run an industrial company. I set up and grew a financial business and then sold it on to a larger financial business. So I've learned things from that which might help in some of the debates we're going to have. So I want to be an active participant in the Lords debate, understanding that it's within the model where the manifesto is rightly the thing which the government should be delivering and will be driven by the Commons.
Well, Simon has a question for you. He says, please ask John Redwood how much time he intends to spend in the House of Lords. My preference would be an appointed chamber of cross-sector experts who commit to turning up and participating. What will be his level of participation?
Well, it will be high, because I don't have another main job. I look forward to doing this, and I'm sure I will find it very interesting, and it would be a privilege to have that platform to carry on joining in the public debate. Over the last year and a half, not being a member of the House of Commons, I've been very active in the public debate, but it would be easier if I can work with other people and join into such a privileged formal platform.
And do you think that peers who don't turn up with any degree of regularity should just be disposed of?
Well, I'm not going to start criticising colleagues before I even join them. But what I do think is that, yes, I think it obviously makes sense to use it. And there is now a system which I was very much in favour of, that people can retire or resign from the House of Lords. And I think if you got to the point where you're not interested or you're overseas or whatever, you should either ask for leave of absence or you should say, well, maybe I've got better things to do.
Okay. Josh, does the House of Lords reform, does that come under your remit?
It does not, but I do believe in it. I think that the current situation in which the Lords are blocking the legislation of the elected government of this country is untenable, and I think the Lords as an institution has become sort of symbolic of what doesn't quite work about our political system. And, to sort of step back for a moment, I think the question of what type of upper chamber we should have, should it be elected or not? If it were elected, on what principle would it be elected? Is it about electing across regional identities? Is it across a sort of composition of expertise and so on? we should have these debates in public, and I think they would be energising, and the sort of need for constitutional change in this country to underpin how we change the way our system works is long overdue. And what we prefer to do is fudge these issues, ignore them, and sort of brush them under the carpet, because it usually suits the interests of the people in power at any given moment to do that. And I think that is a problem, and we should have the courage to talk about and think about.
Okay.
Longer term reform.
We've just got time to fit one more question in from Ben in Bristol. In the 1970s and 80s, any whiff of Soviet funding support for left-wing parties here was called out by the press. What does the panel think of the proposed Trump administration policy of backing for patriotic, that's in inverted commas, right-wing parties in Europe? Now, the background to this is a new 33-page document which includes an introduction by Trump himself, says the US government must cultivate resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations, adding that otherwise Europe will face the real and stark prospect of civilizational erasure. Josh.
Well, I found it slightly hard to follow that, I must confess, and I've also not read the 33-page document in question. But so it's the idea that the US administration would fund European political parties?
Yes.
Bad idea. We are, in fact, in the process of bringing in much tighter regulations on the sources of foreign funding for UK politics. UK politics...
And it's not necessarily fund, but publicly back.
Publicly back. All sounds very odd to me. The underlying principle...
Lots of Labour representatives publicly backed Kamala Harris, didn't they?
The underlying principle should be, I mean, there's no problem with a politician expressing who they support in another country, but fundamentally the structures of political parties must be accountable to people in the country that they are seeking election for, and they must be funded by people who are citizens of the country that they are seeking to be elected in. And I think that principle must be protected.
Brief answers, please, Judith.
Well, I think as another example of President Trump giving us advice, I think we've heard it and we'll consider it, and leave him to get on with giving more advice.
And then 5 seconds later. John?
Well, I think we should keep our laws which say that you don't have foreign funding into our domestic politics. And my advice to overseas thinkers and politicians is it's probably a bad idea to express your views on our domestic politics, because the British public are pretty perverse and they'll probably do the opposite.
Benedict?
I think obviously it's well within his right if he thinks that the trajectory of different European countries is disadvantageous to the United States, or indeed to those countries, to voice his opinion and to try and influence them if he would like. I mean, this is exactly what China has done in its own way, simply by funding things but keeping its mouth shut. Ultimately, major powers will try to influence those that are weaker than them, and this is perhaps the main takeaway from this, which is that the United States feels that it is capable of influencing European countries on this level because it perceives us as being weak. This is the same as China. This is the same as Russia. That is the situation we've got ourselves into. So maybe Donald Trump might have a point about the directions we're heading in.
But you should remember that the Democrat president recommended that we stayed in the European Union, and that was very helpful to the Brexit cause.
Right, Thomas in Ipswich says, a library in Cornwall has had a music book returned to it, which was taken out in 1980. What's your most embarrassing story of being very late for something? Josh?
After my wife and I, my wife's American, we got married and we decided that the right thing to do to get our parents to know each other was to some reason go on a linear walking holiday for a week with her parents and my parents.
Oh my God.
They arrived first because our flight was really late. My dad, I said, how's it going? I texted my dad and we were in the taxi on the way from the airport to the hotel. And he said, it's terrible. We're having a really big fight. I just don't get on with them at all. So our worlds were crumbling at that point. And we got there and they were 2 G&Ts down and having a great time.
You do realise you're on the radio relating this?
Yeah, that's true. I think it's. I think they know all of that. It's all fine. That's all public information.
Judith?
I was in a job interview process. It was a very long process. It was being navigated by a headhunter. There was some miscommunication and I arrived a month late for the interview, but still ended up getting the job. But
the other people must have been really awful.
No, it was just the worst comms exercise ever. But the date that he gave me was a month later. He just made a mistake himself.
Oh my God. John?
Well, I think the worst thing that happened to me was when I was a really busy MP and I'd promised my family a holiday abroad, which obviously I was going to pay for, and I'd take them to the airport and I was feeling good about all that, and then discovered that my passport was out of date. And I was almost too late in getting the authorities to actually update the passport to be on the plane to take them on holiday. That would have been a complete disaster, but fortunately it just worked.
No, I thought you were going to say it was deliberate. Benedict.
All of my worst stories involve me being late. There's at least 10 of them. I can't tell the best one, I don't have enough time. The second best one, I was in Kenya, and I was on my way to Mombasa Airport. I was meant to be getting a flight to Addis Ababa. I was in a matatu. I didn't know what had been happening in Mombasa, which was that there was a grenade attack, which meant that all access to the airport was closed. So I'd set off at what I thought was ample time. It was not, in fact, ample time. There was a roadblock 4 miles from the airport, and I was told by a man with an AK-47, you need to walk to the airport on foot. I did not have that much time, so I had to run across this baking 30-degree 4-mile trek. I get to the desk, and there is somebody there filing their nails, and I say, is this the desk for Addis Ababa? Out of breath. It just closed. That's probably the only one that I've got time to tell. But yeah, that was pretty bad.
And I'm very rarely late, so I haven't got one to tell, which is just as well as we're over time. Thank you all very much indeed for coming on the show today. On Monday's panel, we have Conservative Shadow Cabinet member Richard Holden, Labour MP Tony Vaughan, left-leaning think tanker Luke Hildyard, and the political commentator and former Tory advisor Salma Shah. Now, coming up in the next hour, by the time the average man turns 35, around 2/3 will notice some degree of thinning hair. By 50, it's more than half. Yet despite hair loss being one of the most common medical changes men experience, it remains one of the least talked about. And if you're a woman with thinning hair, it's talked about even less, until last week when Sarah Vine, Michael Gove's